Texas, 1944. The sun was still low when the truck stopped outside Amarillo, kicking up clouds of dry dust. Inside sat 24 German prisoners, young women in worn khaki uniforms, their faces pale from weeks of travel across the ocean. They had heard terrible things about America, that captured Germans were beaten, starved, even shot. None of them expected to survive the trip. When the back doors opened, the women braced for shouting and rifles. Instead, they heard a calm voice drawl, "Ma'am, watch your step." Standing in the light was a man in a sweat-stained hat, sleeves rolled to the elbow, dust on his boots. He didn't look like a guard. He looked like someone from an old movie. A cowboy. The air smelled of hay and horses, not fear. Around them stretched a horizon so wide it seemed to swallow the sky. A few soldiers leaned on their rifles, quiet, almost bored. One offered a tin cup of water. "Plenty more where that came from," he said. The women drank in silence, not sure if this was real. Among them was 24-year-old Liselotte Minhart, a former radio operator from the Luftwaffe. She had been captured in France and shipped across the Atlantic. Back home, Nazi propaganda had painted America as a nation of criminals and machines, soulless, greedy, dangerous. But this didn't fit the picture. No shouting, no hate, just the sound of cicadas and the creak of saddles. The man in the hat pointed toward the stables. "You'll be helping out here, feeding, cleaning, maybe riding if you're up for it." The women stared at him, certain they misheard. Riding? Not digging trenches or scrubbing floors? For a long moment, no one moved. Then one of the Americans smiled. "Come on, ladies. Horses don't bite if you're nice." The tension broke into nervous laughter. When the camp gates closed behind them, Liselotte looked back at the endless plains. There were no guard towers, no barking dogs, just wind and light. She felt something she hadn't felt in months: curiosity. That night, sitting on a narrow bunk, she wrote her first note in English on a scrap of paper. "This is not what they told us." For women raised to believe that mercy was weakness, Texas was already rewriting the rules. They had expected chains. Instead, someone had handed them a saddle. The women had been told America would be a place of punishment. Instead, every day in Texas made less sense to them. At sunrise, they woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, not fear. Breakfast came on metal trays: eggs, bread, butter, sometimes even a slice of pie. Nobody yelled. Nobody hurried them. It felt wrong, almost suspicious, like a trick that never came. Liselotte watched the Americans work. Cowboys moved with an easy rhythm, joking as they saddled horses or repaired fences. Even the soldiers guarding the ranch spoke politely, using please and thank you. For women raised in a world built on shouting and ranks, this calm confidence was hard to understand. The first time they were paid, a few paper coupons to spend at the camp store. They didn't know what to do. Cigarettes, chocolate, pencils, even postcards to send home lined the shelves. "They trust us with money?" one woman whispered. The clerk just smiled. "You earned it, ma'am." In Germany, authority came from fear. Here, it seemed to come from routine. Every job had a system: washing laundry, mending fences, cleaning stalls. Nothing was rushed, but everything got done. When Liselotte asked a cowboy how they kept order without shouting, he shrugged. "You treat folks decent, they'll do the job." Letters from home made the difference even clearer. Friends wrote about bombings, hunger, and arrests for small complaints. In Texas, people argued about politics right in front of their prisoners. Farmers criticized Roosevelt. Workers debated war policy. To the German women, it was chaos, but a kind of organized chaos that worked. The food was another shock. Each prisoner received more calories than many civilians back home. Meat, vegetables, sugar, coffee. When Liselotte hesitated over her plate, an American guard said kindly, "Eat up, you'll need it." She didn't know how to respond. Kindness from the enemy was something her country had never prepared her for. One afternoon, the women watched a cowboy toss a half-eaten apple into the dirt, then grab another from the barrel. None of them moved, but every eye followed that apple. In Germany, people were starving. Here, food was thrown away. It wasn't arrogance. It was abundance so casual it felt unreal. Bit by bit, fear gave way to disbelief, and disbelief turned into quiet admiration. America, they realized, didn't rule through terror. It ruled through structure and self-confidence. As Liselotte wrote in her diary that night, "They win not because they are cruel, but because they don't have to be." The real surprise came a week later, when a pickup truck rolled into the yard loaded with saddles. The cowboy in charge, a tall man named Frank Callahan, called out, "All right, ladies, time to learn how to ride." The German women stared at him, sure he was joking. They were prisoners of war, not tourists. But he wasn't smiling like a man who made jokes. Frank explained through an interpreter that the ranch needed help moving cattle. "Can't herd cows on foot," he said. "You'll each have a horse. We'll show you the ropes." The women exchanged nervous looks. They'd been expecting handcuffs, not reins. The first lesson was chaos. One horse bolted, another refused to move, and one rider ended up face first in the dirt. The cowboys laughed, not cruelly, but kindly, and helped them back into the saddles. "Don't fight her," one drawled. "Just breathe. The horse will feel it." By the end of the morning, the women were covered in dust, sweat, and something new: laughter. For Liselotte, the moment she felt the horse start to trust her was almost unreal. The animal's movement carried her forward across the open field, wind in her hair, no guards in sight. For the first time since capture, she felt motion that wasn't controlled by someone else. That afternoon, they ate together at a long wooden table. Cowboys passed biscuits and poured coffee without ceremony. Nobody barked orders. When a woman said thank you in broken English, Frank tipped his hat and replied, "You're welcome, ma'am." Simple words, but they landed deep. The work was hard, mending fences, carrying feed, cleaning stables, but it was honest. The cowboys treated them like extra hands, not like enemies. "You work, you eat. That's the deal," Frank said. And it was. Days passed into weeks. The trucks from the camp came only once to deliver supplies, and no one counted heads. The women could have tried to escape, but where would they go? Out there, the land stretched forever. Besides, for the first time, they didn't want to run. Each evening, the ranch gathered around a campfire. Someone played guitar. Others hummed along. One night, a cowboy started singing Lily Marlene. The Germans froze, then joined in. English and German voices blended under the same sky. The song of soldiers and sweethearts from opposite sides of a war. That night, Liselotte wrote in her notebook, "They trust us with horses. Maybe that is what freedom feels like." By the fall of 1944, life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm. The women worked from sunrise to sunset, feeding livestock, cooking, mending gear, and sometimes riding with the cowboys to move the herds. It was exhausting, but fair. And every evening, as the heat faded and crickets took over the silence, they sat outside the bunkhouse, watching the sky turn red over the plains. One morning, The camp officers handed out paper and envelopes. Each woman could write one letter home. The rules were clear: 1 page, no politics, and every word would be read by censors. Still, it was the first chance in months to reach their families. The bunkhouse that night was quiet, except for the scratch of pencils. Liselotte began slowly. "Dearest Mama, I am alive. You will not believe this, but I am in Texas. They call it a ranch. The people are kind." She paused, unsure how to describe what she saw every day. Men in wide-brimmed hats, fields full of cattle, laughter that came easily. She added, "They feed us well. They let us ride horses. I even drank something called Coca-Cola." Weeks later, the replies came back, full of disbelief. Her mother wrote, "Are you sure? It sounds like a dream." "They must be tricking you." Liselotte smiled when she read it. How could she explain that kindness didn't always hide a trap? At the ranch, the lessons went far beyond work. The women watched how Americans treated one another, how a foreman could argue with his boss and not be punished, how a cowboy could speak freely to a soldier, how laughter always seemed to break tension. For Germans raised in a culture of rank and obedience, it was a new kind of order, one built on trust. Sometimes the cowboys teased them, gently but without cruelty. When a young woman struggled with her saddle, one said, "Don't worry, ma'am. You'll get it faster than most of our rookies." The tone made it clear. It wasn't mockery. It was equality. Evenings often ended by the fire. Guitars, harmonicas, and soft voices filled the night. One evening, a cowboy hummed Lily Marlene, and the women joined in again. No one planned it. No one spoke after. For a few minutes, the war seemed very far away. That night, Liselotte wrote another note she would never send. "They said we were enemies, but under these stars, I can't tell the difference." In Texas, she was learning something that couldn't be taught in any classroom. That peace doesn't start with treaties. It starts when people stop acting like enemies. Spring, 1945. The wind on the Texas plains carried the smell of rain and new grass. Calves were being born, and the sky seemed endless again. But in the bunkhouse, a quiet unease grew. Rumors spread that Germany had fallen. Some said Hitler was dead. No one knew what to believe. One afternoon, Frank Callahan walked into the yard holding a folded newspaper. He took off his hat. "Ladies," he said softly, "it's over." For a moment, nobody moved. Then tools dropped, and someone began to cry. The women had imagined this day for years, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss of a home that might no longer exist. That night, they sat by the fire in silence. Frank poured coffee and said, "You'll be going home soon." The word home hung heavy. What did home even mean after all this? Bombed cities? Empty streets? Families they might never find? A few weeks later, army trucks arrived to take them back to camp for processing. The cowboys stood by as the women packed their things, mostly letters, small gifts, and photos. When Liselotte folded her work gloves into her bag, Frank walked over and handed her a small brown parcel. Inside was a cream-colored Stetson hat. "So you don't forget Texas," he said with a smile. She laughed through tears as the men cheered. As the trucks pulled away, the women looked out through the wooden slats at the waving hats and fading barns. For Liselotte, that image stayed burned in her memory. The moment she stopped being a prisoner and started being a person again. Months later, she stood on the ruined docks of Bremerhaven. Germany was rubble. Yet in her bag, she still carried the hat, a symbol of something she couldn't quite name. Dignity, maybe, or hope. She found work as a translator for the Allied occupation forces. Her English full of cowboy slang and Texas drawl. Soldiers smiled when she called them partner. In 1948, she spoke at a women's conference in Stuttgart. "I was a prisoner of war," she told the crowd. "But I never felt like one. I learned that freedom isn't given by governments, it's given by people." Years later, she moved back to Texas, opening a small bakery in San Antonio. Above the counter hung a photo of her in that same hat beside Frank Callahan. The caption read, "From enemies to friends," because sometimes the strongest victories don't happen on battlefields. They happen when strangers choose decency over hate. If stories like this move you, give this one a like, share it with someone who loves history, and join us for more true tales of humanity that change the world.